Hey guys, Tommy Carrigan with Tommy Untamed. We've got a great show coming up. Thank you for watching. It's Mr. Mike Vecchione, who you've been on here a zillion times before. The links to all your books are in the description. But last time you and I kind of we did what I normally do with shows, which is just let them go whichever direction. But normally when I have authors on like yourself, it kind of stays on a certain track. But you're kind of a hybrid in that you're an author, but you've also been on here a ton of times, whereas most authors I'll have on a couple of times and we'll kind
Right.
of go through their works and then that'll be it. But I keep having you back on, and so it's kind of a Venn diagram of the author versus when I just, for lack of a more formal phrase, when I just wing it. This is kind of, so we did that last time, and I actually really enjoyed it. And so for everybody listening, please go in the description. Please go grab his books. But we talked about corruption last time, and so kind of just to, I don't know, merge into. I think what we got to last time was there's always a certain level of corruption, and I think your argument was is it can't be accepted though. You can't stomp it all out, but you have to have the mindset that you will, because if you don't, that starts to breed, I guess, new pools of corruption. But what were you just saying before this about Biden, the
Well,
federal government?
yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for having me back. I
Yeah,
appreciate it. And I have been working on my new book. So, the one that we talked about with Jimmy Dennedy, I'm back to writing that. And
beautiful.
I'm almost halfway through. So one of these days, hopefully you'll have me back with Jimmy and we can go through it. I think I might have it done sometime during the summer. So
Beautiful.
it's it, I got to tell you, Tom, you probably picked this up when we were talking to Jimmy. And for those of you, or those of your viewers who didn't see those podcasts or heard them, Jimmy Dennedy is a detective friend of mine who I worked with in Brooklyn. Did a very difficult case with in terms of the murder of two police officers by a guy who had started or was involved in the starting of the Attica riots in the 70s. And it was a horrendous situation because there were guards killed, state troopers killed, there were inmates killed, and and the way it ended, you talk about corruption. The way it ended, the way the whole situation ended, was because there were bad guys who were criminals who were in jail and who had done things like murders during the riots. There were also situations where the guards and maybe even some of the troopers had done some things that were questionable. Let's be kind. That at some point, after an investigation by an independent group, took place, the governor of that time, Hugh Carey, governor of New York, decided that he was just simply going to pardon everybody. He didn't want to get into the whole situation with the guards, didn't want to get into the situation with the inmates, and because of the opinion of the leftists who were mostly involved in pushing this investigation was that that the guards have to be punished as well, and rightly so. I mean, if they did something wrong, they should be punished. So what he did was he just simply said, you know what, everybody goes free. And the two guys that wound up killing these two innocent police officers that Jimmy made the arrest on were two of the people who were two of the main actors in this riot, and they just were back on the street. Went back on the street because of this pardon, and unfortunately, they ran into Christy Masson and Norman Cerullo, who were the two cops, or the two cops ran into them. And rather than just simply, you know, they were walking down the block. They were coming from a meeting with someone. They were planning another series of robberies, we believe. But the cops didn't know that. The cops just simply the cops actually were answering a silent alarm in a store in the neighborhood, and they were on patrol. So they saw these two guys coming from the direction of where the silent alarm situation was, and kind of was suspicious. Were these guys involved? But they weren't. And it would have been nothing for these two individuals to simply stop, answer questions of the cops, and then go on their way, and everybody would have lived. But that didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen is because particularly the one guy, the guy who lived, by the way, I should say that of the two bad guys, one was killed in a shootout by his partner who was shooting the two cops. And the guy that lived, he ultimately went on trial. He was a member of the Black Panther Party and then the Black Liberation Army, which were groups that were involved in killing police officers in New York City back in the 70s. So in any event, that's how I met Jimmy. That case, that was the case I met him on. When you think about, we've talked about corruption in many different forms. That was a form of corruption as well. It might not have been the governor getting a piece of, a check or money. It was, you know what? I don't want to deal with any of this. I want it to all go away. And therefore, I'm going to give a blanket pardon to everybody who was involved. Well, that is not fair, quite frankly. And it's the kind of insidious, and I say insidious because it's not blatant. People who would listen, who have listened or are listening to me will say, well, how is that corruption? Well, it is because people who should have been brought to justice weren't. And they weren't because this guy didn't want to have this on his record as governor, you know? So if he had punished the police, the state troopers, maybe they wouldn't have backed him in the next election. If he punished the leftists, the radicals, well, then they were going to demonstrate from now until the next election. So the bottom line is that there are lots of times when corruption doesn't necessarily hit you right in the face. It is, as I said before, insidious in some situations. And unless somebody finds it or actually looks for it, they're not going to find it. And I think I mentioned this last time in one of the cases that I did involving the head of the Democrat Party in Brooklyn, who was a very powerful guy. His corruption was that he was making money. He was having people who were running for judgeships use friendly managers or businesses that were printing flyers or making signs and stuff because they were kicking back to his campaign. So what he would do is he would say, okay, Miss Judge candidate, you want me to back you? Here's what you need to do. You need to use this business to print your flyers. You need to use this business to be your campaign manager, this individual. You need to do this in order, you need to just use, and all of these people who he would point them to, these judge candidates, were people who were beholden to him and people who would take care of him in his election situations, on and on and on. So I may have mentioned it. If I did, forgive me, but I think it's worth repeating. When the jury found him guilty of one of four indictments, I indicted him 4 times. He was convicted 3 of the 4. When the jury found him guilty of the very first one, they said to me afterwards, how is it that no one saw this before? How is it that nobody, did anything? And the answer, Tom, was nobody looked. Nobody looked. Everybody looked the other way, or didn't look at all because they didn't want to find what they knew was there. So that to me is how why I say that corruption is insidious, and it's and it's frustrating to people like you and me who are honest people, that there are people out there who essentially get away with, the old saying is get away with murder. You know what I'm talking about. Just get away with doing this stuff, and we would never get away with it. If you or I tried to pull that kind of thing, we would never get away with it. So when I said to you off the air when we began about how what's coming out now about the 4 years that Biden was the president, it's clear to me that he, first of all, was not the president. He was not pulling the strings. Somebody was doing it because he wasn't capable of doing it. I mean, when you listen and listen to his speech, watch the way he operated during those 4 years, only a blind person would miss that, what was right in front of our eyes. And that is that this guy was incapable of running this country. And there are people, and here are the real bad people in this whole situation, in my opinion, are those around him who knew it,
Hmm.
and those around him who didn't say to the cabinet or to the vice president, hey, there's a 25th Amendment. This is a candidate for the 25th to use the 25th Amendment on. And this is the guy who, you talk about carrying the football, the nuclear football around. Well, he's the guy that was the only person who was authorized to press that button, right? Now, somebody who could whisper in his ear, yeah, Mr. President, go ahead and press it, even though perhaps they shouldn't have, was what we were in danger, how we were in danger for the 4 years that he was president. And I see it now, and I see, and it reminds me, and it angers me, quite frankly, that the Justice Department at the time looked the other way as well. I mean, I can't understand how educated people could look and observe over the course of a day, a week, a month, a year, and not say to themselves, oh my God, the country is really at risk. It's just something which now is coming to the fore. And what angers me even more now is that, to talk about the press knew it too, did nothing and said nothing, and now books are coming out. So they're making millions of dollars on stuff that they should have been bringing to our attention as part of their job as journalists. So you talk about corruption within the networks and within newspapers was also present. And that was clearly insidious, because you and I are not sitting in an editorial meeting, let's say, of the Washington Post or the New York Times. So we're not there when the editor in chief or somebody says, hey, listen, this is what happened. Here's the way we're going to handle it. We're gonna handle it XYZ, and it's going to be, just kind of glazed over if something is wrong, or Biden does something wrong, or something happens. And that is, to me, is really is horrible, horrible, horrible corruption, in my opinion. So, I haven't been shut up since you
No, no,
turned.
no, no, no. I know.
So,
I have on guests, so it's not just me. No, you're doing the right thing. No,
no,
it.
and let me just say one other thing. And
Yeah.
the reason that I'm so upset by this is that I spent about 6 years of my career in the DA's office, almost the last 6 years I was there in the DA's office, doing this kind of investigation, doing investigation into people who were basically supposed to be people we looked up to, judges, and and they were committing crimes because they were corrupt. They were fixing cases when they shouldn't have been. So I am really attuned to this kind of stuff, when people kind of look the other way or do nothing when it's so obvious in front of them that something is going wrong, because there are people who are being hurt. There are people who are being hurt. Let me just say, I'm sorry to keep
No.
saying this, but in my situation, with two of the judges who I ultimately convicted, they were cousins. And one of them was the one who was fixing the cases involving divorces. At one point, when he was talking to our informant, he mentioned his cousin, who was also a Supreme Court judge. And the reason he mentioned mentioned him, is that Judge A was angry with the cousin judge because the cousin judge was in charge of their mutual aunt's estate. He was running the estate of this woman who had a considerable amount of money. And he judged, the cousin judge, is the only way I can refer to him at this point, was essentially stealing money from her. He was supposed to be watching her estate, and he was taking money. His excuse was he needed money to send his kid to college. He needed this, and he was just basically raping this estate. Judge A was pissed off, not because Judge B was hurting their aunt. He was pissed off because at the end of the day, when she died, there'd be less money for him to inherit because the other guy was stealing it. So we found that out through through an interview that he I'm sorry an interview through an informant who was talking to him, and it all came out, and we said, "Holy shit! How did we miss this?" And then we opened up an investigation, and it turns out everything that we heard on that tape was correct. So here's a guy who's supposed to be taking care of his aunt, and basically what he's doing is stealing her money. The people in Washington are supposed to be taking care of this country, taking care of us, making sure that our life is as good as it can be, and yet they were essentially raping us because they had a president who was totally incompetent running things. And as long as they stayed in power, well, then they didn't give a shit. So, so anyway, that's I guess I was thinking about talking to you
No,
all week because of this stuff, and I said, I got it. When we get on the air, I have to talk to Tom about this because it's not exactly the same, but the idea of corruption in this form is pretty much universal as far as I'm going to do this for me, and I don't care what happens to other people and who that hurts. And again, I spent 6 or 7 years of my life investigating people who did this. So not only men, by the way, but go ahead.
no, no, no. Well, I was gonna say, first of all, no. This is what most of my shows are. It's just me and the guests going back and forth. But I know these are newer for us. But last time I think we were talking about, I was floating the idea of, is a certain level of corruption allowable? It's like, do you look the other way on some? I think the analogy was like, you're not going to get every speeding car, but you should go for if there's
Correct.
if there's a report of a gunshot, it's like you do got to track that down, but you're not going to see. And you countered, and you were like, no, you have to go after all of it because even to foster the environment or the mindset that some of it's okay is itself not okay. Is it the end of the world if you don't get the one car speeding? No, but what you've now done is you've developed a threshold and said some things are allowed that shouldn't be allowed.
Correct.
That
Yeah.
alone, that piece right there is what breeds more of it. And you know, I think I tried to I tried to project the idea of compromise onto something that there shouldn't be compromise. And an example would be yesterday I had on Claire Lopez, who's probably one of the only guests that's been on more times than you. Worked in the CIA for 20 years, big Republican, and she was saying she didn't like everything in the recent bill or the defense bill, but she understands there's compromise. So I look at something like that and I go, yeah, you're never going to get all of it, and you can't let
Correct.
perfection, prevent. Or like the special forces guys always say, like you're never going to have the perfect go time. You try to get as close as you can. That I think it was a fallacy for me to try to apply that to corruption and go some stuff is allowed, because what happens is that then happens at higher levels. And so sure, you have outright corruption, you have the people who are, putting in a president who's senile or whispering in his ear or, using the power of the DOD for corporate interests. But then there's another level where you have, yeah, people maybe pushing a news story and go, well, it's not the end of the world. We won't touch this. Well, if you don't touch it, well, Now someone else goes, well, hey, MSNBC's not touching it. I don't think we have to touch it.
Correct.
And what happens is it starts to coalesce and grow. And I mean, like the podcast, no matter who it is, always if I have a podcast, I aim to get, these are all things I tried, 8 hours of sleep, go to the gym, put on a clean shirt, brush my teeth, even though it's not in person, and be there on time and ready to go. Put my phone on airplane mode and remove it. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter if it's my cousin or if it's Elon Musk. I try to do that. And the reason is because no, it's probably not going to be the end of the world if I check a text with one guest, but I tend to look at it as something that creeps. And it's
Without a doubt.
if I cut a
That's
corner here, I cut
exactly.
a corner there, and next thing you know, it's 5 years in, and you're 10. I get away with this with Mike or with whoever, and next thing you have on some presidential candidate, God willing, in 5 years, and they kind of look at him like, is he looking at his phone? So my point is you can't catch 100% of it. That much I'm aware of, but you have to go after everything you see because the very mindset of some of it's allowed is what breeds all of this. We wipe down most of the counter. We wipe down when I volunteered at a hospital in college because it looked good on your med school resume. They'd be like, you have to get, when you're using the disinfectant, you have to get 100% of the gurney. Because if you don't, there's a little bit of germs left, and that shit's gonna grow. And yeah, most people are probably coming in for like a broken arm, and it doesn't matter if a little bit of bacteria gets on them. But what happens when it's a 94-year-old hip replacement? Now that one little part you didn't wipe down, if that gets into an open wound, they're dead. And
Yep.
so I think that is what had me thinking last time, and because I have you, I can kind of the same reason when I have on like a Delta Force guy, I can ask questions to them because they're like that they have this experience. I can bounce these off of you, and if it was just me and someone else talking about this, I'd be like, I don't know how valuable our opinions are, but because you did this for the majority of your professional life, I feel like I can bounce these off of you, and you seem pretty resolute in like, no, you can't do this. And lastly, it's not only would you and I not get away with it, I think most good people, even if we could get away with it,
Wouldn't.
we wouldn't. And I always look at that with the podcast.
You're right.
Weird advertising, emails like, hey, tell people that this is this. And in my mind, I'm like, I probably could get away with this, but that's just dog shit. And
Yep.
so you have to legislate or have to enforce laws with the mindset that not everyone's going to look at something wrong or a shortcut and go, I'm not going to do that. There are some people that are going, man, if I can get away with that, I'm doing that. And that is where you have to kind of be airtight with your application of the law. And if you're okay with a cop going, I'm not going to chase that one car down, you can't clutch your pearls when that same idea, just allowing some of it to go. Well, now it's happening at the Oval Office.
Yep. Yep. There's a lot of things that you said that kind of brought old cases to mind me and old situations. There was a time in New York City where corruption in the police department was an everyday thing. Everyday thing. A cop would walk into a luncheonette, order a cup of coffee and a sandwich, and walk out. And it was kind of expected. And the idea, what I'm about to say, is that the owner of the luncheonette could have said, no, you got to pay me, or this is what the charge is. But they didn't. They didn't do that because they allowed it to happen because they wanted to make sure that when they picked up the phone because someone was fighting in their place or was beating up somebody, that the cops would show up. And I think the mindset was, well, if I don't take care of them, they may not show up and take care of and take care of the business that they really need to take care of. And that was something which was again insidious. I keep using that word, but a free cup of coffee may have turned out to be later on, something else. And the idea was that that small things built into bigger things. And I'm about to tell you about this case that you probably know, the movie Prince of the City. And what it was these corrupt narcotics cops were basically making busts, and in some situations they were either stealing the money from the dealers or stealing the drugs and then selling it elsewhere. Okay, so that the name of the book is Prince of the City, and it was a movie. And it brings me back to Jimmy Dennedy again, because there was an incident, not necessarily with him, but when he moved from the street, from patrol to narcotics, he went to Manhattan South Narcotics. He was asked to appear on an old shows around, was not is not around anymore, but it was a late night show called The Tomorrow Show. And the host was a guy named Tom Snyder. And it was like, after the Tonight Show and after the night, whatever it was. It was a late night show, very popular. And Tom Snyder was a pretty popular guy, and he did a lot of these interviews. So on the Tonight Show, on the Tomorrow Show, I should say, a couple of nights before Jimmy went on, was a detective who was part of this Prince of the City situation. I'm not going to get into his name; it's unimportant. And the movie was about to come out. And I remember this from my days when I was in charge of the department's disciplinary system. The cop who was in charge, the chief, called me in one day and said, "Listen, this is what's happening. This guy, this detective is leaving the force. The deal was he turned and became an informant for us, but when the movie was going to come out, the deal was that he had to retire, and it's coming out." So this guy, the movie comes out, he gets a spot on this Tomorrow Show, and the host asks him about what these cops were doing, what he and his fellow detectives were doing, which was essentially stealing drugs, stealing money from drug dealers. They thought, well, they're only drug dealers. Who gives a shit? What are they going to do? Go complain?
Yeah.
You know? So he said, this is what his justification for this was. Listen, I was taking drugs from drug dealer A, and then I was giving drugs to informant A, and informant A would then be giving me information about drug dealer B, C, and D. So his idea was, I steal from drug dealer A, I give a taste of that to an informant who's a junkie, and then he gives me information so I can make more busts. So what they did was they would bust, I call him dealer A, they would steal his money, steal his drugs. Maybe they wouldn't steal it all. Maybe they would turn in a little bit so it would look like they had done something to, voucher it and put it into safekeeping. Maybe they took some of the drugs, but a lot of the drugs was stolen. And this guy justified him stealing the drugs and then giving them to an informant in return for more information as a justification. It was justified. That's what I was doing. Well, and the second part of his interview was, all the bosses knew this. Everybody was corrupt at that time, including the police bosses. NYPD looked the other way. As long as we were making arrests, as long as they didn't give a shit. Well, when he not testified, when he was interviewed on TV about and said all of that, the department was up in arms. It was years later, obviously. Things had changed. They had rooted out the corruption at that point. And they asked the department and the PBA, which is the union, the police union, asked Jimmy to go on to respond to what this guy had said. Why? Because Jimmy had made many arrests during the course of his time on the street, what they call integrity arrests. So he would arrest a guy, let's say, for a gun, bring him back to the precinct, interview him. And the guy would say, I got $200 or $300 in my pocket. It's all yours if you just kind of look the other way and let me go. Or on the street, I'll give you $1,000. Just let me go.
Mhm.
So he would then, what he would do then is he would say, listen, you got to come to a particular spot. I hear you. meet me at this particular time and we'll take care of it. You bring the money, and I'll make sure that I give you the gun back, or we'll do something. Why would he do that? Because he wanted to be wired, and he was wired. The guy would then give him the money, and then he would arrest him for bribery on top of the gun, right? So Jimmy made a lot of those arrests, and they wanted him because of that record that he had, and now he was in narcotics. They wanted him to go on the air and to refute what this corrupt detective had said about not only the bosses, but about what he did and what was in his mind justification for stealing and giving drugs to junkies. And Jimmy did a good job. What Jimmy said was, listen, the bottom line is you have this guy on and you think he's a celebrity, a hero. He's telling you that he's giving drugs to junkies in return for information. Essentially, he's committing a crime at that point, in addition to the crime of the crime of not arresting and taking money from the guy or taking drugs. There's a crime. This crime he was committing was a sale. Giving someone drugs is a sale. So this cop, who you think now, or this detective, who you think is a hero because he was taking these bad guys off the street, essentially was a drug dealer. He was a drug dealer. And giving people drugs in return for information is not legal. And it is something which you should refrain from. Now, the issue was, at the time, people were looking the other way, Tom. They were looking the other way. They thought that, oh my God, drugs were a menace to society. They still are, but back then it was horrible. New York City was just inundated with drug dealers and druggies and junkies, and these guys were supposed to be, the elite of the elite. We're taking bad guys off the street. Meanwhile, all they were was essentially selling, quote unquote, drugs to informants to get information about other people that they could arrest. And what would they do when they arrested these other people? They would steal from them, take their money, take their drugs, and then continue doing the same thing. So it was this, this kind of system that continued and continued and continued. And the point is, you can't look the other way under any circumstance, because when someone did look away in that situation, it just told those that were the bad guys, hey, it's okay to do this. Or in their own mind, they justified it. They said this guy said bosses used to look the other way. And it's what we were saying before. You can't look, no matter how small the corruption is, you can't look the other way, because a small amount of corruption ultimately at the end of the day turns out to be this huge, this a mess. And it's the reason why I said to you before, or last time, that any kind of corruption is bad. Any amount of corruption is bad, no matter how small, no matter how inconsequential you think it is. The cop goes in and gets a sandwich and a cup of coffee from the local deli owner. That's corruption. That's corruption. You can't do it. And if you look the other way, there will be a time when perhaps the cop will do something more, and he'll say, well, listen, I got away with this. Maybe I can get away with more. And they take a chance. So politicians, in my opinion, based on what I know, were the worst of this. We cleaned up. The police department in New York City is top notch and cleaned up. And there are no more prince of the cities. There are no more guys who take and steal drugs. Maybe here or there, there's a case, one particular, but it wasn't systematic or systemic, I should say, as it was back when these guys were operating. Politicians, I've said this to you before, and I'll say it to you again. I don't believe there is a politician, any politician, who isn't corrupt in some shape, manner, or form. None. And you might say, well, if a guy, it's a small thing. He takes. With our mayor was indicted for taking in return for favors, taking upgrades on flights to to various countries that he was going to. Well, you look at it and say, "Oh, big deal. It's just an upgrade." Well, what happens is when he accepts it, now he's got someone beholding to him.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm sorry, he's beholden to somebody. So that's the other part of this that we haven't talked about is that what do you give up when you are a corrupt guy? Like, let's assume for the moment in my situation with the cop who took money, who took a free lunch from a deli owner. What if he were to go in one day and the deli owner is now doing what I said before, selling drugs? He's out and out selling drugs in the back, or he's got an illegal gambling operation in the back. Well, you think that that guy who owns the deli is expecting the cop to arrest him? No, he's expecting just the opposite, that the cop will look the other way, walk out, eat his sandwich, and drink his cup of coffee and move on. So there is no such thing, in my opinion, as small corruption. There really is.
Heaven's Harvest Prepper Food. 72 servings per pail, 25 years shelf life. I've had the owner Clayton on the show before. He's a God-fearing, America-loving patriot. Get one of these, get a couple of them, throw them in your basement. It's good to have it, not need it, than to need it and not have it. If you don't want to do that, you can get their seeds. You can plant your own garden, so you don't even have to keep buying them. You can just get the goods and start your own, or you can even get freeze-dried fruits and vegetables like bananas, apples, strawberries, and raspberries. They support the show. It's an honest product. It's a good safety measure to have, and they keep my show free for you. So I'd implore you guys to please go to heavensharvest.com, use the link in the description, promo code TPC. Axios Fitness Coaching is a premium resource for holistic strength and conditioning services. Axios is best known for the Training Club, capital T, capital C, an exclusive community that prioritizes accountability, technique, diet, and nutrition. Everything you need to do to take action against the decay of the modern world. Whether you're looking to improve your physique, build strength, or just take care of your health and fitness, Axios will provide you with a solution that is effective and simple to execute. All you need to do is complete the intake survey, and you can see if you're a good candidate for the training club or any other of the services. And it's going to sponsor the show. So, one company falls off, another one arises. So if you guys like the show, you want to work out, throw the show a couple shekels. Go take the survey. Thank you so much, guys.
Higher ultraviolet exposure is associated with lower mortality. The United Kingdom is a high latitude and low sunlight country. Researchers there collected data on over 360,000 participants in a study of UV exposure via solarium use. When compared with non-users, solarium users had 15% risk lowered of all-cause mortality, 23% lower risk of cardiovascular mortality, 14% lower risk of cancer mortality, and a 12% lower risk of non-cardiovascular, non-cancer mortality. In other words, all other causes. Quoting the researchers, our study adds to the growing evidence that the benefits of UV exposure outweigh the risks in low sunlight environments. A link to the original publication is available in the box below the video. Get some UV light this winter. Immerse yourself in the tranquility of the blue. Visit a Blue Room soon. www.blueroom.com.
Well, then it also voids any, I don't know, mental logistical barrier between that and something else. And I don't mean in like a literal sense. Like if you allow this, then this is going to happen at the White House. I'm aware that some small time cop in Jersey his actions aren't affecting the White House. But if you can justify whatever it is, it's for the greater good, or we're getting more people, or getting more drug dealers, and we're an informant. And who cares if you pad your pocket a little bit? If you can rationalize that, they're doing construction. You cannot in any real way look at it at the highest levels and feel all the stakes are still there. If whether a cop comes in and gets a coffee and a bagel and you don't charge him for it, or whether someone comes in and they get, an extra 4 billion, if, some general leaves the Pentagon and they gets a cushy gig at Raytheon. You, no part of you can be surprised or indignant because it's the same thing. It's just scaled up. One plus one is
Absolutely.
two. A billion plus a billion
Absolutely.
is 2 billion. It's the same thing. It's just on different
Yep.
levels. And then not only that is they are related, not in the sense that a cop takes a free bagel and next thing you know that causes the Iraq War. I'm aware that's not how it works. But what does happen is, with the exception, I don't even maybe with the exception of nobody, everyone rises through the ranks. The Pentagon, the corporate world,
Correct.
up to your local, to state, to federal, to presidential government, you all rise up. And if you're all allowing certain levels of corner cutting, then it it in many ways actually does cause it at the highest levels because you've all been doing this horse shit your entire career. You've created a system where those are the only people that advance, and that if you do it by the book, you're a sucker. And if you want to get ahead in the world, you gotta slit some throats. You might even be able to lie to yourself and say, "I see the big picture." You can't be surprised when you get all the way up there and it is now ingrained. I mean, what's the average age of a president? I mean, Obama was pretty young, but the average age is what, like 60?
Correct.
Yeah, these
Correct.
guys get to it after the
Right.
40 years of dog shit of backroom deals, and then what? They swear in and they go, "Nah, I'm a good guy."
Yeah.
No, you don't. What? No, it's January 1st. It's New Year, new me. No, it's not. No, it's
Yeah.
not. And then the reverberations are massive. And it's no longer that you're taking a free bagel. It's that you're getting a kickback from this and they're getting a kickback from that. And next thing you know, it does coalesce into some storm of we're invading a country. It's like, well, how did
No
that
question.
happen?
No,
Well, that's how
absolutely.
this
No question.
shit happens. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's you,
Hey,
you
look, we had a perfect example back with the same guy we're talking about, Biden, when he was vice president. He went to Ukraine,
yeah.
forced Ukraine to fire a prosecutor who was investigating his son
Yeah, I'm
and his
leaving in
son's
30
business, right?
minutes. Yeah.
And if you don't give it, then you're going to lose whatever billions of dollars. We're not giving them to you. So that was something that to me was so obvious. But what did anybody do anything? Absolutely not. Did Obama, who was his boss, say, "Are you out of your mind? You know what that is?
No,
That's blatant."
cuz
Yeah,
he's cutting
yeah.
corners. They all
Yeah.
are.
So it's something that is so now so I don't want to say expected, but it was such an obvious situation, and it was not dealt with, that it became something more than likely. I'm sure that Biden would have done whatever he did when he was president anyway, because I think he was a corrupt guy even
Yeah.
before he started. But this now, who knows, may have said, "Whoa, nobody's going to touch me. The president is my boy here. He's not gonna do anything to me." And he, in his own head, he said, "I can do anything. I can do anything." You know what his famous statement was? That nobody with a Biden. So that's the kind of stuff that created that's that sort of thinking. So um,
And
it was I don't know. To me, in corruption in a lot of ways is almost, it's not, obviously not as horrific as murder, but the bottom line is it is the kind of thing that eats away and eats away and eats away until at some point what it's eating is no longer there. And who knows what that would be.
well, not
So,
only that, it's there are these larger and larger. It's like no one. What's the quote? There's no one raindrop thinks it's responsible for the flood. But at a
right,
certain point, if all these little actions they add up, and it's either you remove that prosecutor, and this is my because of my son, or whatever the thing is. And as that adds up, well, now, will they remove that? Who was the prosecutor? It sounds like the prosecutor was a guy that was not afraid to go after anyone, including the president's son. And so,
correct.
as you remove these other pieces, now all of a sudden you have guys, and probably all over the world in relations with foreign countries, that most of them are, yeah, probably negligible. It probably is not like the straw that breaks the camel's back. But all of a sudden, it's like, well, now you're taking out these Jenga pieces of Ukraine. We can't know for sure, but how many Jenga pieces were removed, and now all of a sudden there's a perfect storm where you have a war that's still being funded and it's still going, and now we don't know. Would that have happened if you had not taken out these foundational pieces? Well, what
Correct.
what was the effect? Was it a stolen bagel? Well, no. Now you have a million. Now you have a million men dead. Now you have that I would imagine close to a million sets of parents with a flag on their mantelpiece. And now you start looking at that, and no one person did it. No one person.
No.
But you go, how did we get here? Well, you were leaving a lot of garbage around, and then a spark came, and then the wind hit it the right way. No one set out to start a forest fire, but now here
Hey,
we
so,
are.
in my opinion, was extortion. And that, I'm sure he didn't look at it as extortion, or maybe he did, but that's what it was, extortion. And it's the same, the analogy is that, well, if I can get away with extortion here, I can get away with doing something else. I can do other things that are equally as bad, maybe more extortion. But it's the same as with that cop in terms of what he was doing, in terms of giving drug dealers drugs in return for information about other drug dealers. So he could steal money from other drug dealers and other drugs. So my point is that the idea is, oh, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was getting information. So that's okay. But what he didn't understand, I'm sure he understood, what he was doing was committing a crime in order to get the information. But then once he got it, he would then go ahead and commit yet another crime. So I guess my point is that you have to recognize, if you're an honest person, that when you open your mouth and you do something or say something, think about it before you do that. And think about what the ramifications are. And don't just simply say, well, the end justifies the means. I was just simply getting information so that I could lock up other drug dealers. But what I was doing was feeding the poor guys that should have been getting help and getting off the drugs. I was giving them drugs, and that was okay. I mean, the same thing with Biden, right? I mean, Biden didn't understand that what he was doing was extortion, that you do this, otherwise I'm going to hurt you by not giving you money or making sure you don't get money from the United States government. That to me is an obvious extortion attempt. And he got away with it, and nobody said a word. And the thing that also killed me was that when he became president, and that whole incident became something that was now amplified, the press never even said anything about the word extortion, never came out of anyone's mouth except maybe the right-wing press. But so, you say, okay, I got away with this, then I can get away with the next thing. I can get away with the next thing. I can get away with the next thing. And that's what was happening with the people who were the subject of my investigations and, my corruption investigations. This guy was shaking down judges and shaking down individuals to do what he wanted, to have them do what he wanted them to do for his own benefit. And if they didn't do it, another extortion, if they didn't do it, he would hurt them in their career. So it the bottom line, going back to everything we started with, Tom, is that a small amount of there's no such thing as a small amount of corruption. It is maybe corruption at the beginning before it turns into, a major criminal situation. But if you had nipped it at the bud, then you wouldn't have had that criminal situation down the road. So,
Well, we'll wrap it up with this because like I told you, I got to run earlier. But it always makes. I think it had to have been 99 or 2000. So I was 9 or 10, and I was in mass, Catholic school, and my friends were coming back, and they had not put the Eucharist in their mouth. They'd held it in their hands, and it was because you're not supposed to, and then they would eat it back in the pew. And being at a Catholic school with Catholic parents, and that was a mortal sin. And
Oh, yeah.
I remember I did it, and I think it was my mom, and I was like, but he was doing it, and she was doing it, and it might have been my grandma that said it, and she said, I don't care. And this is at the time who was the Pope. She goes, I don't care if Pope John Paul II is next to you and shows you the Eucharist in your palm. Like you take it and make the sign of the cross. And I just remember, so I was like, oh, it doesn't even matter if the Pope's doing it. Like my grandma is still gonna like beat the shit out of me, or my mom, or. And I kind of think about that. I don't care if the president's doing it. Like, do the right thing. It just and I've tried my, I think probably to the best of my ability in this life has been through the podcast. I've really tried my hardest to just do the right thing, and it's a very long slog, but I think ultimately not only is it the right thing, and not only is your conscience clear, and so I'm 5 years, 1,750 episodes in, I'm actually starting to realize now that there actually is like a tangible value to it. I now have people who legitimately trust me and they recommend me to people. And I'm
No
like,
question.
oh, it wasn't the right thing just for the sake of the right thing. There is actually a value to it. There's a merit to it. People, what a surprise, tend to like you when they find out you're not a sleazy shitbag. And so, like, it takes a while, but I think there's actually a real value to it other than just doing the right thing.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I'll leave you with this. When I
Yeah.
started out as a DA, my father, who was a working guy, he had his own business, but he was a working guy, blue collar guy. He was not a lawyer. He sat me down one day, and it was close to when I had gotten the job. And he said, listen, if you always do the right thing, then you never have to worry. And he would repeat that to me over the course of my career before he passed away. If you do the right thing, Michael, you don't have to worry. And I've said that to people, and I've said to people who have accused me of, doing something. There were plenty of accusations and things that people said I did because they didn't like the result of a particular case. So of course they have to blame somebody and say, well, you were dishonest about this, that, or the other thing. And I never was. And I always used to say, listen, I got news for you. It didn't happen. Because I always think about my father's words when I was in a position to, to finish up something or to decide and do something, to take an investigation in this direction or that direction. Always do the right thing. I add there's one more thing. I remember one of the first huge cases that I had gotten handed to me. I was in my office late at night in the DA's office and going over the case, making myself, getting myself familiar with it to go to trial. And I found a document, Tom, that was exculpatory to the defendant. It was favorable to the defendant. Okay. Now, why people had the case before me hadn't turned it over, but they didn't. Now, here's where I was at my desk all alone. This document, I could have just taken this thing, ripped it up, thrown it into the garbage can. But I didn't do that. I didn't do it because that's not the right thing to do. It was the wrong thing to do. It's illegal, and it's something that would be a violation of my oath. But the bottom line is those words to my father in my head were there all the time. If you do the right thing, you don't have anything to worry about. And that was it, and I have had sometime down the road after that case was over a long time, someone said to me, didn't you even think about, I said, yeah, I thought about it, but I never thought that I would just simply put it in a garbage can. And Tom, no one would have known.
Mm-hmm.
No one would have known. The defense attorney wouldn't have known it existed. Nobody knew it existed. I knew because I had gotten it, I had seen it in the file, and I turned it over the way I was supposed to turn it over. So,
Well, it's what you do when no one is watching. That's what matters the most.
absolutely, positively.
And spoiler alert, the big guy is watching. But yeah, there was another one. I don't remember where it was from. Maybe it was like a doctor's office when I was little. But it's Winnie the Pooh. Because if you tell the truth, you don't need to remember a thing.
Correct.
There's no story. Well, where did I tell this person? Even when I
Yeah,
do the show, sometimes I'll be tempted to be like, I've got, I'm meeting this, and I'll be like, just tell the truth, and I'll just be like, hey, I think I've probably done it with you before. I'll be like, hey, I don't feel that great, and so if I end the show early, it's because I got to go shit. And the guests are like, what the fuck? And I'm like, I just want to be honest with you, like,
Absolutely,
and it's just like, because you never want them to be like, all right, go enjoy seeing your family, and you're like, what are you talking about? You're like, oh, you lied to me. It's just, you also just, you don't have to remember. Just be
yeah.
honest. Be like, hey, I got shit I have to do. So, but yeah, for everybody listening, please go in the description. Please go grab any of his books. This will be up today, Tuesday, not tomorrow, the next day. I'll send it to you, and we'll schedule the next one. And
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, I enjoyed this. I enjoy shooting the shit with you. I think we should
I
do
like
more
it
of
too.
these. I like this. This is fun.
Glad that we
It's a
do.
fun change of pace. Um, but my
Anytime. Thanks, Tom.
Yes, sir. Always a pleasure talking to you, brother, and thank you for your time. And yeah, guys, just do the right thing. It's really it's not hard. Do the right thing. Big
Yep.
man's watching. And yeah. Mike, as always, it's a pleasure.
Take care, Tom.
Appreciate you, brother.